Hello, the Divine Code reading for August 5th. We are in the chapter on sacrificial offerings. We're doing page 117 and 118. Topic number 5. If a Gentile wishes to bring a sacrifice, it is fitting to consult with an observant Jewish Torah scholar who would be able to advise him properly about this idea and who is knowledgeable in teaching and showing how to offer sacrifices to God. Rambam, Laws of Sacrificial Procedures, 1916, see Tractate Zivapkim 116b, Kol Bo'oi Ha'olam, page 103. The Jew is not allowed to do a sacrifice at a private altar. It's absolutely forbidden for a Jew to do this. Only the sacrificial system in the temple is available to the Jew. This temple doesn't exist, and therefore the Jews haven't been doing sacrifices in 2,000 years. A lot of the area there's a lot of study that's done on a regular basis. There's study that's done about how the temple sacrifices work. There's not been a lot of study in how the Noahide does sacrifices. So the Noahide is allowed to do it at a private altar. The Jew is not allowed to do it at a private altar. Therefore, the Jew can teach the Noahide, the non-Jew, how to do a sacrifice at a private altar. But he can't participate in it, and he can't participate, but he can teach. But it's difficult to find the teaching because it hasn't been done for so long. But it's important to have that teaching. It appears that Gentiles may only offer a sacrifice by slaughtering the animal or bird with a nick cut in the way that Jews perform kosher slaughter and not by any other means of killing. So this is one area that the Jew has a lot of experience in. The kosher slaughter is a regular activity. Jews in times past and even today, they don't eat a lot of meat, but they do eat they do eat a certain amount of meat, and it's considered a more festive item of food. And the Jews have a lot of festivals and a lot of Shabbos, so they do have a certain amount of meat, and they have a lot of experience doing this kosher slaughter. So that's one area that clearly they can teach easily. They're able to teach. The reason they specifically need to slaughter in this manner is that it is known that this is the Torah's preferred method of slaughtering, which causes the animal the least amount of pain. And since it is being offered as a sacrifice to God, it is fitting that a person should give satisfaction to God through causing It is unfitting that a person should give satisfaction to God through causing unnecessary pain to the animal. That would be similar to a commandment performed through a sin, for which it is said, as an instruction to the Jews, that it is not honoring God, but in fact, desecrating his honor. Likewise, it is logical that if a Gentile offers a stolen, lame, or injured animal, that is not what God desires. So in this area, a person could slaughter an animal many different ways. Slaughtering through the Jewish method is the least painful for the animal. It's a very sharp knife, and therefore you don't have a nick in the knife that can cause a pain to the nerves the sharpness of the knife causes a clean, basically a painless cut that by the time it might be felt, the animal is already anesthetized through the loss of blood. The animal is cut, loses blood, and the consciousness starts to go prior to the point where the feeling of pain would occur. And therefore, it's a more gentle way of killing the animal, and that's considered more pleasing to God, to kill the animal in that manner. You know, why would you want to do something that causes pain to an animal, and then think that that's somehow going to be pleasing to God? It is unclear if a Gentile may bring a sacrifice of a meal offering. See Rambam, Laws of the Sacrificial Procedures, chapter 3, topics 2 and 5, that a Gentile may not bring peace offerings, sin offerings, or meal offerings, as they are defined in the temple services. Rambam states that it is a common factor in all of this. The common factor in all of this is that a portion of the offering is to be eaten, and only burnt offerings that are completely burned are permitted for Gentiles. So the meal offering, some of it's burned and some of it is eaten. That's like flour that's being offered in the temple. So would it be possible to give a meal offering where it's completely burned? That wasn't done in the temple times, and it's something that the rabbis have to hash through and try to make sense out of whether or not it's possible to do a wholly burnt meal offering. It is also said that when a Gentile brings an offering to the temple, he does not bring a wine libation along with his sacrificial animal. Rather, the wine libation that is required for a temple sacrifice is provided by funds from the Jewish community, which implies that Gentiles are forbidden to bring wine libations and meal offerings on their own. It is unclear whether this prohibition applies only to the offerings brought in the temple or also for a Gentile's personal altar. The wine would be kind of splattered on the side. You know, it would be poured out. You know, the wine would be poured out as a libation, and that's part of the temple sacrifice. There was many different parts, and a lot of it is explained in the book of Leviticus and then in the oral traditions. The wine of a non-Jew does not have the same holy. Wine requires a certain holiness, sanctity to be acceptable in the Jewish service, and even in for like Kiddush and Havdalah, if they're using actual wine, normally they use cooked wine, which doesn't have the same sanctified significance. But if they're using uncooked wine, you know, real wine, then it has to be kept safe, and therefore a non-Jew bringing it in, they would be concerned. So if a non-Jew brings the animal to the, you know, to be wholly burnt in the temple, that's acceptable. The slaughter in the temple would be done by the priest, or by, you know, it would be done by the Jews. It would not be done by the non-Jew. And the wine that's required of a certain level of holiness would also be provided by the temple by the temple funds. Now, obviously, if we're allowed to sacrifice an animal off the temple grounds for our private altar, would we be allowed to bring our own wine? You know, because if we're allowed to do the slaughter, why wouldn't we be allowed to bring the wine? But that's an area that needs to be studied out. At this point, it needs to be dug through better in order to know for sure how the private altar works, the details of the private altar. And would the wine be required or would it be optional? That's all stuff that has to be figured out. If it's optional, then you could still do a sacrifice and just don't do the wine because we don't know. Or if it's required, then it has to be figured out before doing anything. It is also unclear if a Gentile may pour oil or wine libations on a personal altar. Note from the words of the Rambam, Laws of the Worship of Stars and Idols, Chapter 1, Topic 3, that Abraham taught everyone to serve God, and that to him it is fitting to bow down, sacrifice, and pour libations. This implies that it is permitted for Gentiles to pour libations in their worship of God, just as it is permitted to offer sacrifices. And also we're told earlier that we're permitted to bow down, to prostrate ourselves. So we're allowed to do the bowing down and the sacrifices. And according to this, we can also pour libations. And we have not learned that the privilege was taken from them. We also find it that Jacob, in Genesis 28:18 and Genesis 35:14, poured oil and libations, either wine or water. See Targum Yonathan and Midrash Genesis Rabbah 35, chapter 35:14. On the altar he built. It is somewhat implied from Ramban on Genesis 28:18 that for all generations Gentiles are permitted to offer libations. It is also unclear if this libation will be poured only on an altar, and if it may only be along with a sacrifice, after which it would be forbidden for any benefit, or if one needs to pour it on the fire, thus including it in the law for the burnt offering. So are we adding it to what's being burned, or are we just pouring it out? Because pouring it out would be a different type of an offering altogether, besides the ola, the totally burnt offering. So that would make the libation it would be separate, or would it be part of the burnt offering? Since there was no teaching from the sages that is found on these matters, we are unsure of how Gentiles should conduct themselves in regard to meal offerings or libations. So the sages don't, we got all these books that have been written, and in these books they don't cover whether or not a Gentile can do a libation or can do a meal offering, which is pretty exciting because we don't know. And it's like, this is an area of Torah that we can study, and it's like a fresh area of Torah that can be dug into, and that's an exciting thing. As to whether it is permitted for a Gentile to offer incense on an altar, or in another way for the service to God, see Jerusalem Talmud, Tractate Megillah 1:11, that Rabbi Yehuda the Prince told Rabbi Romanus to prepare incense for Ananias upon the latter's request to bring incense offering to God. So Ananias was a Roman leader. He requested the ability to do an incense offering to God. So the rabbis prepared the incense offering for him, to prepare the items. And he purposely left out, that would be Rabbi Romanus, left out one of the ingredients from those required for the incense in the temple. There's a whole list of ingredients and how it's mixed and all that. And he left out one of the ingredients because you're not allowed to make the incense for anything other than the temple service. So because this was outside of the temple, an incense offering to God being given outside of the temple, therefore they had to take out one of the ingredients. This implies that the basic act is permitted. It appears from this source that it would even be permitted for Ananias to offer the complete temple incense of the 11 ingredients. But Rabbi Yehuda the Prince instructed Rabbi Romanus to remove one ingredient, since it is forbidden for a Jew to prepare the complete incense for use outside of the temple. So the Jew is not allowed to do it. Now, that would be similar to the Jew not being allowed to do the or to work with a non-Jew doing a sacrifice outside the temple. But in this case, he didn't do the whole thing, and therefore it was permitted. If Rabbi Romanus had taken out not included one of the items and had a little baggie on the side, said, "Oh, by the way, this is the ingredient that I didn't add," and that would allow Ananias to include that ingredient in. Would that be permitted or not? It doesn't go into that. So how much can the rabbi be involved in teaching before it becomes being involved in the service? That's not clear, but apparently in this case he was able to do a lot. The rabbi was able to do a lot. Makes me think about the non-Jew a few years ago who did a sacrifice outside of the, he did a sacrifice. He went to Israel, and he was instructed by the rabbis with the instructions of how to do a sacrifice, a burnt offering sacrifice on a private altar. And it looks like, I don't know, we don't really have the details as to what happened, but it looks like a lot of the material for the altar was brought together, and how much the non-Jew put the altar together and later on took it apart, and how much the rabbis did various aspects of the work. It's not clear, but from this story of the incense, apparently the rabbis are allowed to do a fair amount, to help out a fair amount. They're just not allowed to, so at some point they have to stop being involved and they have to step back and let the non-Jew do it. Where that point is all part of the study that has to be figured out. This story is not found, that's a story about the incense, is not found in the Babylonian Talmud or in the teachings of the Rambam. And thus it seems to the author of the Divine Code that it is not fitting for a Gentile to offer it. I would suggest it may not be permitted. It's obviously, if Rabbi Yehuda the Prince was allowing Ananias to do it, but maybe because they took one of the ingredients out, and it doesn't say that they offered a suggestion that he put it back in, that maybe it wasn't allowed, but they allowed him to do something similar to it. That's not clear. Obviously, with a regular animal sacrifice and a full burnt offering, we're allowed to do the whole thing. So the incense offering, we're not allowed to do the whole thing. So maybe that means we're not allowed to do it. That seems to be what the Divine Code is saying here. But it is definitely an exciting time to be alive, because this is the time when, you know, this is an area that we're not being told we have to figure it out, which is pretty cool that we have that opportunity to dig into these things. Thank you.